Hey everyone, this is John from EastCoastArmory.com, and I'm here today with a project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled Armortek King Tiger heavy tank. Since the last video update, more progress has been made to the hull's interior fittings, as well as the engine has been permanently mounted to the vehicle at this time. We'll be going over all of these additions and upgrades that were made to the model to get up to this point in this video. Now, before I can go ahead and fit the engine, I need to go ahead and add the weathering to the engine compartment bay. Clearly, as one might imagine, trying to get weathering into this section over here is going to be very difficult once the engine is permanently affixed. So, prior to the engine getting mounted, the inside received its weathering. For the weathering, I just utilized my usual technique of washes and some streaking with the airbrush. Now that everything is fully dry, the engine is going to be dropped where it needs to be. In addition to the engine getting fitted, I also went ahead and drilled out the indexing holes for the exhaust system, which, as we could recall from the last video update, is mounted right aft of the engine compartment bay. The tubes are going to come out, enter into the engine compartment, enter into the engine, and then snake their way right to the back over here. Well, they'll be emitted from the detail exhaust manifolds that, again, I mentioned in a previous video. Well, without further ado, let's go ahead and get that engine seated in. And here's the engine now permanently fixed to the engine bay. Now, a common question that I get for people who are interested in one of these engines is, how exactly does one secure it to your model? Well, really there's no set answer because this is totally up to the builder's discretion. You can secure the piece to the vehicle with fasteners, like I've done and mentioned in the past, or you could actually just use straight up adhesives like I use on this build here. Now, one advantage that the silicone has, as opposed to using other more rigid type of epoxies and adhesives, is that because the silicone is a rubbery material, it will give a slight insulation between the model and the surface because it acts as a bit of a cushion or a shock absorber, which for a radio control tank is definitely something that is going to be appreciated. Now, like I stated before, once the engine is fitted to the vehicle, it's then time to continue the plumbing on the smoke system. This bridges the smoke generator to the exhaust manifold, and to do that, I need to fabricate these two adapter pieces that you see here. Now, the copper fittings that you see are the ones that are supplied with the Armortek system, but these two other components were fabricated by myself. Now, on the Armortek smoke system, if we recall from the previous videos, is that on the section where the smoke gets emitted from the generator, there's a very wide fitting that is meant just for this type of fitting that we have here. Now, with the type of tubing that I'm utilizing for the smoke system, it's much more skinnier compared to the tubing which was supplied with the kit. Now, in order to adapt the Armortek one for my tubing, I needed to fabricate this adapter. Now, the adapter itself is made from turned PVC and resin, and we have here a small little aluminum tube that is the same inner diameter as the rubber hose that I use for the rest of the plumbing. This simply just gets mounted into place and will then bridge the systems. And here are the smoke systems now with their plumbing completed. May be tricky to see in this light, but here we have the adapters that I fabricated before. And the two black hoses are the ones that patch into the exhaust manifolds. From here, this brings us into the engine compartment, where the tube actually plugs into the resin exhaust manifold found on the engine, then runs across and then emerges from the portion over here, and it leaves going directly into the armored rear plate where it patches into the manifold. Now, if you notice, silicone is used on all of the joints for the plumbing, and this serves twofold. First, it secures everything in place, and secondly, it seals off any gaps that can emerge due to the way the pieces are plumbed together. Of course, this will prevent any sort of seepage of the smoke when the smoke system is powered on, and all the smoke will be forced through the exhaust manifold. Now that the engine is fitted, the remainder of the interior components of the engine compartment can start filling in. And this would include the oil and fuel tank fillers, caps and tanks, which are going to be located in this section over here, as well as the radiator and cooling fan ductwork and clusters, which are going to be located on either side here of the engine compartment. Now, I've been working in CAD on creating these components, and you can see some samples that are showing up on screen now. Hopefully by the next video or two, I should have them in hand and mounted permanently to the vehicle, thus completing this rear section over here. But of course, more information on that is to follow in a future video update. Now, with most of the hull machinery now fleshed out, it's now time to start working on some of the extra animations that are going to be going into this build. The first animation we're going to talk about is the bow machine gun. Now, on the stock Armortek kit, the bow machine gun is just a detail piece and is left static. But on my radio control builds, I like to modify them so that the machine gun has a pivoting animation to it. Now, for this bit of equipment, the Armortek kit supplies you with the parts that you see here. This is true for not just this version of the King Tiger, but all of the other previous renditions of the King Tiger that have been released since about 2010. This is also probably going to be the same on the new upcoming Jagdtiger release of this kit. The Panther kit also, I believe, has a similar setup. Now, for the machine gun detailing itself, the kit does supply you with a little barrel section that looks like the MG34, but the piece is very basic in its overall detailing scope. Again, enough to get you off the ground, but for this model here, I'm going to be phasing it out for a aftermarket piece that I'll mention towards the end of this series. Now, for the pieces themselves, they're actually pretty decently done. Starting with the main machine gun ball. Note, it's one single piece of CNC'd aluminum. You can tell from the mill marks on it. But they also went ahead and milled in little bullet traps found on the inside, which is a very nice touch. You can see on the inside how the ball just fits into this little cavity. And then that link brings us to this retention plate that we have here. The retention ring just, again, holds the ball in place, and the unit is one self-contained housing, which is a nice little bit of engineering. Now, for the ball itself, this again is typical for all the Armortek kits, from their Tiger 1 to any German tank with a bow machine gun ball. This piece here is basically what you see. And here's the main housing now going through its detail modification phase. Now, one of the changes I'm going to make to this unit has to do with the edge that we have here. On the Armortek kit, the unit is just a round dome shape, and it goes straight, it butts up straight against the front armor plate of the vehicle. Now, on the real King Tiger, that's not actually the case. On the real King Tiger, there's actually a flat that is found on the rim that we have here, and then that makes contact with the hull, and that gives you the point where they add the weld beads. It's really hard to describe in the abstract, but when you see this photograph I'm throwing up on screen, you can get a better appreciation of what I'm actually referring to. Now, in order to do this modification, you notice that the housing is mounted to my lathe. The lathe is probably the best way you're going to execute this procedure. If you try to do this by hand, you're going to run the risk of having the piece oblong, and you might not be able to remove the necessary amount of material in an even manner. With the lathe, that's not the case. With the tool, you can easily remove just the right amount of material, and it'll be completely even on the turning. Now, this is one of those procedures where you're going to need the proper tooling. If you don't have a lathe, it's best to avoid this procedure and just mount the unit stock to the kit, because if you try doing this by hand, it's probably going to lead to more problems than solutions. So, with that out of the way, let me go ahead and add some cutting oil here to the tool and start the machining process. Okay, now that the flat has been added, I'm just going to round off some of the tooling marks with the sandpaper. This should help with the cast texture that I'm going to be adding momentarily. I'm also slightly rounding off the portion of the flat that makes contact with the dome, as it's seen like this on the real unit as well. So, what I'm referring to is this area right over here. Right there. Just adding a slight radius to that really helps improve it further from what I've done so far. Alright, and there we have it. Let's take it out of the lathe. Nice and smooth. Pity I kind of have to ruin the surface with cast texturing, but that's just the nature of these beasts. Now I'm also going to go ahead and deburr the bottom portion over here. If you notice, there's a slight burr left over from the CNCing process. This is best removed because then it makes the addition of the ball and also the retention ring go with a much smoother way. Now to remove this is just going to be done with a file. I can just file that smooth, and from there I could go ahead and continue on. And here are the machine gun parts now ready for the next step of assembly. You'll notice that everything has been painted and primed, and in addition to that, you'll notice on the external housing itself, I went ahead and added my cast texturing. Now this is done in my usual format with my usual material, and you can see pictures of what the piece looked like pre-primed popping up on screen now. Now for the machine gun ball, you'll notice that not only has it been primed, but I also went ahead and airbrushed a nice thin coat of the base Dunkelgelb on it as well. This is because once the unit is mounted inside of this section over here, you want to get this pre-painted because once the piece starts pivoting around, you're not going to really be able to get a thorough coat of paint on this item. So it's why it behooves you to go ahead and pre-paint the units prior to assembly. Now also, with this piece here, you want to use something very thin, like an airbrush, to apply the paint. If you apply this via a paintbrush, it may be a little bit problematic because of the tight tolerances on these pieces. You're more than likely going to scratch the paint off during the piece's operation. So if you use thin coats like I did here with the airbrush, this is a good way to mitigate that. Now this piece here, no mods made to it yet, it's just been basically primed. From here, the unit can now go into its assembly, and then I'm going to make some modifications to it in order for the piece to go ahead and rotate left and right. While on that, one modification that I did make is I drilled a hole in this center portion over here, and I tapped it so that I could thread on a fastener, which will be used to connect the linkage to a servo, but that's going to be discussed in the next following steps. Now, while I was going through the assembly phase, I noticed that once the ball and that retention ring were mounted on, the ball was snagging up and it was really hard for it to pivot inside the unit. One of the things I noticed was that due to the CNC machining, there was a small little rim that was present in this section over here. This rim has to do, I guess, with the way the piece was turned, and because there was a burr. This burr was clamping onto the pivoting ball, preventing it from rotating. So with a Dremel, I just went ahead and cut away and added a small little bevel on this little section over here, removing the burr, making for a nice smooth little transition, which will definitely help with the piece pivoting once fitted to the vehicle. And here's the unit now fully assembled and ready for installation. Here we have the exterior, and then the most important part are the changes that were made to the interior. Here you can see the little modification that I made in order to have the piece function. Now, for anyone who's a common viewer of my channel and have watched my other Armortek builds, this design here should look very similar because it's one that I've basically standardized on all my builds. The way the system works is we have a little guide track here, and then we have this lever which would eventually connect to the servo, and this is then connected to the pivoting ball for the machine gun. Now, the reason for this little track here has to do with the connection of the pivoting system to the servo. If you try to just have an unsupported arm coming out of the pivoting ball, when it hooks up to the servo is going to want to exhibit some kind of a rotational type force on the ball. So rather than it going left or right, it's going to just rotate in a radial motion like that, which is not something that you're looking for this type of a animation. By having this little track here, you'll notice that there's a slit that is cut into the brass, and the piece itself that connects to the ball is also a nice flat plate. With this restricts the type of motion that the ball can go through. So when the servo actuates the part, rather than the ball spinning like this, all of the forces are going to be exhibited in a straight linear motion like we have here, as opposed to a radial one. Just by moving the piece with my finger, you can see exactly how the force is being transmitted through the piece. Now, one thing that's different on this version compared to the ones on the Tiger 1 or even on the Sherman that I've done in the past has to do with the way the bracket is fabricated. Now, you'll notice that it has this very extreme angle to it, and that has to be there by design. Because of the way the machine gun ball mounts to the bow of the King Tiger, you're going to have this type of a angle running through it. So having the piece going straight out this way was going to prevent the ball from rotating because there's not a whole lot of surface area that is left exposed in order to attach the fastener to. So in order to do that, I had to fabricate this bracket here in this really funky angle in order for it to align properly with, or index with, the ball. Now the piece itself is comprised of a few pieces of brass that were soldered together, and then are affixed to the unit with the same two fasteners that are used on the kit to secure this retention plate to the front machine gun ball. With the way the system is, it can drop directly into place without any sort of other modifications required for the assembly or the installation. Now, being a King Tiger, the same type of design can also work on the Panther series as well, which are made from pieces of plastic that were then turned into spacer washers, and these just lined up with the fasteners, and once everything is tightened in place, they offset the ring slightly over the machine gun ball, which does the job in keeping the ball securely in place, but it's loose enough for the piece to still pivot freely. Now, for the length and geometry of this piece here, this may or may not be altered depending on how the servo arrangement gets mounted to the vehicle and how all the hookups are then connected. But more information on this, of course, is to follow. Now, after the assembly work is completed on the ball, it's then time to mount it to the front armor plate. And that's what this little divot here on the front tooling is for. Now, the piece does fit on, but it's in a very snug manner, and I'm going to open up the tolerances on the armor plate here just to allow the ball to fit in with a little less effort. Now, why this is important is twofold. First, you want to have a nice, smooth, flush assembly, as it makes the build go by easier, but more importantly, you have these two indexing holes that we have on either end for use of the fasteners, and they have to line up perfectly in order for the piece just to thread on. And by opening up the tolerances, this should facilitate that with greater ease. Now, to widen the hole, I'm going to go ahead and utilize a Dremel with a high-speed removal bit just to carve away on some of the material here, just again to open up the tolerances. Now, if you're doing this, I'm going to be doing a freehand, so you're going to have to pay attention to the circumference, make sure it's nice and even with the tool removal. But keep in mind, if you are off or you take away slightly too much material compared to the other, do not fear, don't sweat it, because around this portion over here, there will be some sculpted well beads, which will conceal the seam work. So if you make the hole in a, shall we say, not symmetrical circle, you can putty it up and cover it, conceal it with the welds, and be good to go. And really, no one would be the wiser. Okay, and there we have it. You can see now the ball drops directly into place with no issues to mention. Now the hole, I did a pretty decent job with the symmetry. I will say though, trying to get it on film and do the grinding work was a little tricky, just with the way the camera angle is, and you don't want to see the back of my head doing the procedure, so that added a little bit of difficulty to it, but I was still able to muscle through regardless. After the grinding was out of the way, the machine gun mount was able to drop in without any other complications. Now, the fasteners were the kit supply one and lined up absolutely perfectly with the threaded sections found on the machine gun ball. The only addition I made, with the exception of some Loctite, was the addition of two small lock washers that were added to both of these fasteners. Other than that, the unit was basically a problem-free install. From here, the piece can now be hooked up to a servo, and then I could go ahead and finish off the mechanical functions for this animation. Now from here, I'm going to work on the top deck rails. Now the model is designed so that the top deck gets permanently attached to the upper hull. And this is something that I've done in my own personal King Tiger build, but one of the requirements that the customer had was the ability to get access to the inside via the removal of the entire top deck. Now to do this, I am going to have to make some modifications to the strapping system. Now, currently there are 2 straps that are supplied with the kit in order to be affixed to these sections here of the hull. And these are these sections that I have over here. These are your typical Armortek stamped steel plate brackets and are pre-drilled for the fastener locations. Now, these do 2 functions. First, they mount the top deck to the vehicle, but the way the top deck on this vehicle is manufactured is just like on the real King Tiger, where it's actually in 2 halves. And here's what I'm referring to. Just by moving this sliding plate out of the way, you can see how the 2 plates are designed. Now again, this is just like the real vehicle, which is a good thing. Now, to make the top deck remove in one piece is going to take a little bit of engineering. First, the 2 halves are going to have to be connected together, and this is absolutely critical because of the turret rotation ring that is found on these Armortek kits. Now, I'm going to go for more information on that in the next video update, but you can see how it's going to be crucial in order to get the 2 plates to secure as one. As if you notice on these 2 plates over here, you see how the fasteners are going to be used to secure them to the deck. Now, because of the new magnet system I'm going to be developing, this setup here is going to have to change quite a bit. Now, I'm going to be utilizing some aluminum angle that's going to become the mounts for the magnets, and then the top decks are going to have steel plates integrally fitted to them so that they can click onto the top deck without the use of any external fasteners. Now, I'm not going to go over the top decks in this video because they're going to be going over a whole nother modification that's going to be discussed in the next video update. But from here, I'm going to go ahead and fabricate the new magnet lock system for the hull. Now, in order to do this, I am going to repurpose the brackets that I just showed, but rather than using them to support the roof, they're actually going to be used to support the L brackets, which are going to, again, hold the magnets. So let's go ahead and start the modification process. And here's the hull now with its magnet locking system now fitted. Now, like I said before, I repurposed the stock brackets that were originally used to secure the top deck to these sections over here, but they were repurposed for the use of supporting up these angle pieces which mount on the magnets. Now, in addition to being supported by these 2 sections here and here, I also went ahead and mounted them to the other 2 mounting brackets that are on the rear of the hull. Because of this, the unit is nice and sturdy, and once the top deck is assembled, the unit will be able to click in place and should give a good job with securing it where it needs to be. Now, the way the pieces are fabricated, these are just sections here of aluminum angle, and they are fastened to the plates, these brackets that I mentioned before. Now, for this application here, there is actually a nut on the opposite end, and that just gives a good securing point to affix these pieces. Now, for the magnets themselves, they are drilled and tapped directly into the aluminum, so no nut is required on the opposite end. Now, currently, the magnets are just pressure bolted on. They're not held on with any Loctite, nor have their heights been set at this point. Because of the upper deck, I need to go ahead and mount the little steel plates on the bottom sides in order for it to correspond with the matching magnets. The heights of these are going to change somewhat in the next video update, and by then the calibration should be set, and I'll go over that during that video. And with that, that wraps up this project update video for this 1/6 scale radio-controlled Armortek German King Tiger heavy tank. If you like this video, be sure to subscribe to this channel where it's a great way to keep up to date on new project update videos like this guy here, or the other smaller scale model showcase videos that frequently get posted on this channel. Another way to keep in the loop on new posted content is by liking us on Facebook. There I have more photographs of this particular build that have been posted since the project start, as well as the other smaller and larger scale builds that have been showcased on this channel in the past. Furthermore, don't forget to swing by eastcoastarmory.com, where there are more 1/6 and 1/16 scale builds and detailed components. Thanks for watching.